going on here? All right, welcome, 5th grade. I am going to read to you the book Darkwater Rising, written by Marion Hale. It is a book about a disaster that strikes Galveston, Texas in 1900. It is quite an awesome book. Let's jump in, shall we? Darkwater Rising, Marion Hale. Chapter 1. The train clicked on its rails, rumbling past cow pastures and summer-parched fields of grain and hay. Open windows funneled dust and straw into my face. And all around me, sweaty children whined their discomfort. Mamas dug into bundles for crackers and cheese, bread and jam, anything to distract their varmints from the sticky heat. I glanced around the crowded train car. You'd think every dang person from Lampasas to Houston wanted to go to Galveston this hot August day. Everyone but me. I shifted under the sleeping weight of 4-year-old Kate, limp and sweaty in my lap, and dark curls fell across her face. Seems I couldn't breathe twice anymore without Mama saying, "Seth, would you button Kate's shoes for me?" Or, "Quick, Seth, wipe that runny nose." And every blasted time Mama's hands were white with flour, she'd holler, "Seth, you'll have to take Kate to the outhouse for me while I finish the bread." Just thinking of it got my dander up. Why God couldn't have sent that child just one big sister instead of 3 brothers was beyond my understanding. Across from me, Matt's heat-red face puckered in a deep frown. He elbowed Lucas for more room, and when he didn't get it, he delivered a swift boot to the leg. I returned the kick before Lucas could even open his mouth to complain. So as you can see, they're on this hot train traveling. They're grumpy, they're bored, and they're acting up. "You're 12 years old," I hissed at Matt. "Act like it." He glanced across the aisle at Mama and Papa, making sure they hadn't seen, then turned back to me with a sneer. "Where's your apron, Seth?" he whispered. "If you're going to sound like Mama, you ought to look like her, too." He nudged Lucas again. "Besides, you can take it, can't you, Big Luke?" Lucas shrugged. He rarely let Matt pull him into disagreements. But recently, things had changed. He'd shot up so much this summer, it was impossible to tell who was taller. At just 10, his new height had become a sore spot with Matt, sparking some ornery mischief. Most of the time I ignored it, but today was different. The train sped toward a spindly trestle strung across Galveston Bay and rumbled into a fragile network of pilings and railings. A trestle, when I think of this, I think of the wooden walk bridge that goes to Island Park. That bridge is an old train bridge made of wood and can be described as a trestle. And then the pilings are big telephone pole type things that they hammer into the ground to build on top of. Mama stiffened and reached for Papa's hand. I glanced out the windows at the green water all around and felt a bit like a kite flying too close to the waves, dragged toward the long, narrow island that was sure to be my undoing, and it was all my uncle's fault. Seth, our main protagonist in the story, likes to blame others for his problems. Galveston is fast becoming the New York City of Texas, Uncle Nate had told Papa just 2 short weeks ago. It's the 3rd richest city in the country by population. We have electric lights, electric streetcars, local and long-distance telephone service, and 3 big concert halls. I peered at the miles of wharves ahead, crowded with steamships, schooners, and fishing boats, and beyond the forest of mast I saw 3 tremendous grain elevators. So the mast on a ship is the tall wooden pole that the sails tie onto. 1,200 ships load and unload cargo there each year. Nate had been quick to add, more proof, I suppose, that Galveston was the booming city of the new 20th century. It was true, my uncle's lumber business had done well, but Uncle Nate thought Galveston could improve his younger brother's lot in life, too. I'd watched him that day through the porch windows, spouting his case for moving like some highfalutin Philadelphia lawyer. The 1900 census is projected to be better than 37,000, he said, punctuating his words with a chewed cigar. And all those people need houses, stores, and offices. There's big money to be made there, Thomas. That foreman job could open the door to you, to your own contracting business. At that point, Papa hadn't said a word. Nor had his eyes registered an opinion either. Either way. Is this thing recording? I'm going to be annoyed if it's not. It is, okay. All right. Just making sure. Sorry, guys. Oh, remember. Where was I? At that point, Papa hadn't said a word, nor had his eyes registered an opinion either way, which had given me hope. He was a good carpenter, one of the best at Callaway and Sons, a company I planned to apprentice with as soon as my schooling was out of the way. If you're an apprentice, it's like you're working with the company and learning from them. It's like on-the-job training. That's what Seth wants to do. Remember, Uncle Nate had continued, Seth is almost 17, time to settle his future. I waited for Papa's answer, but he'd always been slow to share his mind and slower still to change it. As the seconds ticked away, Uncle Nate's face took on color. He flushed deep red and let loose with, "Hellfire, Thomas!" I jumped, almost giving away my position on the porch. The first medical college in Texas is right there in Galveston, he bellowed. Take the bloody position and send all your boys to college. That last statement set up a fierce flutter inside me. Papa already knew that working under a blue sky, shaping raw lumber into walls and doors, roofs and staircases was all I'd ever wanted. But he'd also been clear that about what he wanted for his sons. If he thought Galveston could ensure any of us a profession in medicine, we'd be on the next train to Lampasas for sure. Stay awake. I'd likely end up spending years poring over books and cadavers, those are dead bodies, by the way, and the rest of my life shut up inside a small white room, patching up boils and broken arms. The probability of that happening squirmed inside me like a belly full of grub worms. Uncle Nate poked his cigar between his teeth and gave Papa a lopsided grin. I can get you a nice furnished rental close to the beach. You know how much Liza and the kids would love that. Mama would love that. I held my breath while the vacant expression on Papa's weathered face shifted. I saw a small glimmer of excitement, but it was the hunger in his eyes that finally made me clench my teeth with dread, the same kind of hunger that had always sharpened his words and defined his face when he talked about his son's futures. If I didn't think of something fast, my Callaway apprenticeship would be good as gone. I was no great shakes at arguing a point with Papa, and thanks to my uncle, it might have been easier to empty the Lampasas River with a bucket than change his mind about my taking on more schooling. By the time Uncle Nate left, Papa was convinced that Galveston could provide enough money to see all 3 of his sons through college, and he was running full chisel to make sure he had the chance. Still, I had to try. I waited till I caught him sitting alone on the porch to remind him of how much he'd already taught me about woodworking, and how more than anything, I wanted to be a builder, just like he was. He let me talk, but I could see I wasn't doing much good. I finally threw up my hands. I just ain't got what it takes to be a doctor, Papa. Haven't, Seth. The correct verb is haven't. I blew out a frustrated breath. My whole life had just gone to blazes, and he was correcting my grammar. I knew Papa had never had a chance at much formal schooling, but I'd seen him study every book and paper we brought into the house. There wasn't much he didn't know, and little he'd tolerate when it came to incorrect language or bad manners. He'd been known to rap a grown man's knuckles with a knife handle just for reaching across the table for the salt instead of asking for it. Later, Mama told him he'd been lucky the man was good-natured enough to not lay him flat. That means like knock him out. I knew early on how much Papa valued education. And that was why I'd stuck with school when my friends had gone to find paying jobs. I promised him I'd graduate before I applied for a carpenter's apprenticeship at Callaway. More for his peace of mind than mine. It was a promise I planned to keep, but I sure didn't want to put my life on hold for longer than that. If you don't like medicine, he said, then we'll look into law, or maybe engineering. But Papa, it's not what I want. You know that. His jaw tightened, and his leathery face took on a hard, whittled look. You're too young to know what you want, he said, and the discussion was over. Far ahead, the engine belched steam, and the train slowed. Kate blinked, roused by the scuffle of passengers, putting away leftover food, gathering bundles, and straightening hats. She raised her head, and wet curls stuck to her heat-flushed cheek. I pushed her off my lap and onto the seat beside me, but she scrambled right back up again. She leaned across my shoulder, peering out the window for a better look at what was ahead. Is that Galveston out there, Seth? Yeah, that's Galveston. Sit down. Where's Uncle Nate? Don't worry, he'll be there. Now sit down like I told you. But I can't see him. Where is he? Matt, always quick to show his impatience, rolled his eyes and let out a groan. I glared at him, sitting there like he was the biggest toad in the puddle. What did he have to complain about? I was the one who always had to watch out for Kate. I was the one who was expected to answer all her fool questions. He's waiting for us at the train station, I said, which seemed to satisfy her for the moment. She slid onto the seat, but it wasn't long before she was tugging at my damp sleeve. Seth, she asked in her baby voice of hers, can I sit with Mama? I gladly shooed her across the aisle, where she squeezed past Papa and climbed into Mama's lap. We left the bay and trestle behind, along with the breezy heat and that pumped through the windows, and pulled into Union's passenger station. The air inside the car turned sluggish and stifling, driving everyone toward the doors like cattle to water troughs. But there was little relief. The close, noisy throng mingled around the station platform, blocking the breeze that swept in from the Gulf of Mexico, making it all but impossible to find Uncle Nate. I caught the scent of fresh-cut wood and turned to get a quick look down the harbor. Lumber, grain, and mountains of canvas-covered cotton bales sat waiting to be loaded onto great coal-burning ships headed to foreign ports. Farther down the wharf, I saw crates with black lettering, tea, beet sugar, and big bundles of sisal for rope. Dark men, shiny with sweat, worked at hauling them into the long tin roof sheds lining the docks. Matt climbed onto a bench, searching across a sea of boulders, straw hats, and bonnets piled high with ribbons and feathers. Stay awake. I think I see him, Papa, he said. Pointing toward the street, he brought a buggy. Looks like he brought a dray, too, for the trunks. A dray is, in the horse and buggy world, what we'd call a pickup truck today. It was pulled by horses. It was like just a flatbed that you could pile boxes and lumber or whatever on and haul it away. So a dray. Mama slipped up beside me and pushed Kate's hand into mine. I groaned but felt an immediate sense of guilt. Mama looked pale and wilted in her heavy gray traveling suit. Papa had tried to get her to wear something cooler, but she refused. First impressions are important, Thomas, she'd argued, pointing her finger at him, and you should wear your Sunday best as well. While Papa waited for Mama to pass Kate on to me, he ran a finger around his tight collar, clearly uncomfortable in his only suit. Served him right, I thought. He sure didn't mind sentencing me to a life of starched collars. Take her for me, Seth, Mama said, just till I can catch my breath. She applied an embroidered handkerchief to the sweat bubbling on her forehead and upper lip, patted my shoulder with a gloved hand, and headed toward the carriage with Papa. Matt and Lucas ran after them, leaving me to pull Kate through the noisy crowd alone. By the time I got to the street, Mama and Papa had finished their greetings with Uncle Nate, was instructing his hired man, Ezra, to help them into the carriage. When they were seated, the old man lifted Kate and set her down beside Mama with, there you be, little missy. She stared into his watery eyes with that wide-eyed looks all kids seem to have for anyone different. It made me realize how few colored men she'd seen in her short 4 years, and none of them had ever been close enough to lift her into a buggy. Ezra walked a few steps behind us to finish loading our trunks on the flatbed dray, and Kate said, Papa, that man is black as ashes. Did he get burned? Papa laughed. Dogs and horses come in different colors, don't they, little Kate? But he's not a horse, is he, Papa? No, he's not a horse. He patted her on the head. But colored folk aren't much different. So this is a statement here. It's saying, like Seth's Papa thinks that black African Americans aren't much different from animals. I stared at him. I hadn't been around many coloreds either, but I'd never heard Papa say anything unkind about them. Others maybe, but not Papa. I watched him smile at Kate and felt his words sour inside me. I tossed a quick glance at Ezra. He surely heard, but the man never blinked an eye. I squeezed into the carriage next to Matt, and Uncle Nate called out to Archer, urging the horse south down Rosenberg, right into the Gulf breeze. The scent of sweaty animals gave way to sweet salt air, and the clop of hooves on the wooden paving blocks set up a rhythm that made me feel like I was still on the train. We crossed Strand Avenue, the greatest banking and finance center between New Orleans and San Francisco, Uncle Nate boasted. Then we passed Ship's Mechanic Row, Market, Post Office, and Church Streets. I quickly found myself in the midst of the largest architectural display I'd ever seen. Architecture referring to the way the buildings are built and decorated and adorned. For a brief time, I forgot all about college and my cursed fate, while my uncle pointed out markets and dry goods stores, churches and opera houses. I was taking in the ornate cast iron storefronts. I saw tapestries of raised and recessed bricks and stucco surfaces, and sculpted the island's strong sun into light and shadow effects. I'd never seen the likes of it before. Then I noticed that all the buildings had slate roofs and asked Uncle Nate why. Well, because of the Great Conflagration of 1885, he said. That fire left 40 blocks of the city in ashes and destroyed more than 400 homes. What do you think a conflagration is based on this sentence? The Great Conflagration. The fire that left 40 blocks of the city in ashes. After that, Galveston outlawed wood shingles. Slate has worked pretty well so far. Keep in mind here, the slate is a thin slice of stone. So on the roofs of all the buildings, instead of having slices of wood, keeping the rain out, they put slices of stone. This is a little bit of foreshadowing here. Keep that in mind. Ahead of us, in the middle of Rosenberg and Broadway, stood the new Texas Heroes Monument that had been erected just 4 months ago. The tall bronze Statue of Victory pointed toward the bay and beyond to the San Jacinto battlegrounds on the mainland. A reminder, Uncle Nate said, of all the men who fought and died in the Texas Revolution. We turned west to the monument down an esplanade of palms and oleanders, live oak and Mexican dagger. Broadway was considered the spine of the island, the highest point between the Gulf on the south and the bay on the north, and all of it appeared to be a showplace for the wealthy. Palace-like homes draped in vines sat as much as 3 stories high atop raised basements, behind trimmed jungles of fig, orange, and magnolia trees. I saw bay windows and cupolas, scrolled and spindle trim, wraparound porches, and decorative iron gates, and all of it beat inside me like my own heart. So Seth is looking at all the fancy trim that's on all these fancy rich people's houses, and he's getting excited. His heart is beating at the thought of building a house that fancy. I could tell Papa felt it too. He sat up straight, eyes wide, taking in every detail, too excited to keep still. His jaw twitched, his knee bounced, his fingers drummed against his leg, and it was right then I knew I couldn't give up on what I wanted any more than he could. All right, chapter 1, down. This chapter is just an introduction. It tells you all about where they left and where they're going. They're going to this skinny little island in the Gulf of Mexico. And I would recommend you go to Google Maps on your iPad. Type in Galveston, Texas, and you will see that it is this long, skinny, very low island that's surrounded by water, which would be a great place to live when the weather was beautiful. All right, chapter 1 down. Thanks for listening.